So, hi. We are the Impact Investing Group Energy team, and this semester we partnered with the Energy Institute at U of M to participate in their conference. The conference is called the Public Roundtable and Private Workshop Overcoming Challenges to Electric Vehicle Deployment, and this conference focused on how leaders in Michigan can work to make electric vehicles more accessible to and to deploy them at higher rates than we already are deploying them. And so they partnered with Cirrus, which is a sustainability organization, and so we brought in a lot of panelists who are experts in the field. They're experts in like public policy, investment, venture capital, also researchers who've researched infrastructure regarding electric vehicles and all that. So we participated as as experts in investment flows in Michigan, in investment flows in other parts of the world and other parts of the country. That was our main focus of our research, was to compare, like I said, the investment flows in Michigan to other parts of the world, to show that Michigan is currently behind in deploying electric vehicles. And since we are the automotive capital of the world, we should be investing more than we currently are, have more policies than we currently have. That was kind of the spirit of the whole conference, was to show that Michigan, there's a lot that we need to do to be, not fall behind as this industry is changing dramatically. And so to do that, we analyzed publicly available data, investment databases like Crunchbase, and some scholarly articles that have done a lot of research in this field. And we kind of just collected that data and got some big numbers about where, like, how much investment flows actually are in Michigan and how much they are in other places of the world. Like, California was our main, was a bigger focus for us. And so our mentors in this process were Ellen Hughes Cromrick, who runs the Energy Institute, or she's a leader there, and Lindsay S. Bergreen, who is a venture capitalist in Michigan. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Gitika, who's going to go over some industry overview of the electric vehicle industry.
So the global industry overview of electric vehicles is this industry is definitely growing. Since 2010, there's been $8.2 billion in investment in this industry. And some companies or some countries are leaps and ages ahead of other countries. So for example, if you look at Norway, they're so far ahead than the other companies. They're since 2014 to 2018, they have led electric vehicle penetration from 11% to 32%. And then looking down at China, they're also another leader in global development of electric vehicles. They are doing this through investments in charging infrastructure and the number of models available, which I believe is 100 right now. And then if you look at countries like Japan and Italy, they've actually decreased, or they've become stagnant, which is something that they need to work on. And U.S. is somewhere in the middle between Italy and China, where they've just increased their market share from barely like 0.5%. So that's something that U.S. needs to work on. And then moving on to now break down the U.S. industry overview. So Tesla is obviously leading the number of vehicles that are being manufactured. Some of the goals of the other companies like Ford and GM is to double their sales and investments in electric vehicle spending. Now I'm going to hand it off to Leo.
Yeah, so not only did we want to look into the electric vehicle industry, we also wanted to look at how electric vehicles are going to change the supply chain, dealerships, and also like repair shops. So we just want to emphasize that electric vehicles are going to impact a lot more than just the big three automotive companies. So to start off, we looked at Tesla and found out like where they got their batteries from. So these batteries are like the main component of the electric vehicles. That's like the big differentiator. So Tesla makes their batteries in-house at these gigafactories, and they've become one of the most efficient producers in the world. Meanwhile, Ford and GM are outsourcing to Ireland, South Korea, and Japan to get their batteries. And we think this like shows that like the United States, or not the United States, but like Michigan hasn't done a good enough job of bringing electric vehicles to our state, and that we're kind of like reaching in other places to make this production happen. So we're suggesting more investment in-house. Wait, go back. So then furthermore, repair shops. Electric vehicles don't require as much maintenance as other cars. So we expect a shift from typical repair shops to more like electric vehicle focused repair shops. And we've also noticed that Tesla hasn't done a great job of setting up maintenance shops. And so this is an area that maybe Michigan can take the lead in and set up some sort of infrastructure that works better than what Tesla's done. And then finally, in terms of dealerships, electric vehicles have like a very different approach of being sold. So they aren't sold at many dealerships because a lot of dealerships also have repair shops built into them. So they'd rather sell you a car that needs to be repaired at their shops so that they bring in more revenue. So kind of thinking about the shift and like how are we going to sell customers better cars while still bringing enough revenue to these dealerships? Yeah.
So thank you, Leah and Gitika. That was our industry overview that we kind of did before you could really dive into the investment data. And so this is kind of a summary of the investment data that we found that we'll my team will go into more detail about. And so you can see Michigan compared with other states and other countries in terms of OEMs. The top 8 U.S. startups in electrification and charging infrastructure. So you can see there's promise in the OEMs announced investments, but we're definitely behind in a lot of other areas of investment. So this is just a graphical representation of this data. You can see that Tesla has announced $3 billion in gigafactory investment, and Michigan has announced 21.8, which is really promising. But you have to keep in mind that Tesla has been investing since its foundation around $14 billion in capital expenditures. So they've definitely been investing in this space much longer and at much greater magnitude than Michigan OEMs. But if you compare, both Michigan and Tesla to Volkswagen, that's kind of a stark contrast between how much planned investment Michigan has and Tesla and then Volkswagen, which is definitely leading in this category right now. And so this is showing the top 8 U.S. electric vehicle startups that we analyzed that Jack will go into more, just showing the difference between total investment of $4.3 billion in California startups and $1.15 billion in Michigan startups. So to go more into detail about the OEM investment, I'm handing off to Alex.
Hello, I'm Alex, and through my research, we searched the three major OEMs, which include GM, Ford, and FCA. I also did research on Tesla, and one of the big things that I found in Tesla was the reason why they have their numbers were so low was because that they use gigafactories, and they only have one gigafactory, but it could generate a lot of energy. So just diving into this, General Motors invested $300 million in the Chevy Bolt, which is a new electric vehicle. And then Ford also invested $900 million in a Flat Rock plant, which is also in Michigan. And then FCA, which stands for Fiat Chrysler Automotives, they invested $4.5 billion in Michigan. And we're going to see a lot of potential with these investments in Michigan, just because we've been so far behind. So to sum it up, there's been total investments of $5.7 billion, adding over 7,000 jobs to Michigan, changing the whole dynamic of electric vehicles. And now Jack is going to talk about startup companies. Yeah.
So not only did we want to look at the OEMs, we also wanted to see where startup investment is going in electric vehicles. So to start with Michigan, basically the biggest player is Rivian. They're planning to make an electric SUV by 2020, and they've raised 1.15 billion in total. Their latest round was 700 million from Amazon, and then really that's the biggest electric vehicle startup in terms of funding in Michigan. The only really other major startup through our research we could find was Bollinger Motors. They're mostly self-funded by the founder, but they're also looking to raise 100 million. And in contrast, when we were talking about the top 8 startups, of those 8, all of them outside of Michigan were in California, except for one was in Texas. So I pretty much put here the startups in California who had raised the most money. You can see there's Faraday Future raising $2 billion, Canoe raised $1 billion, Lucid Motors $1.13 billion in total, SF Motors $200 million. So some things to keep in mind is clearly California started a lot more startups, and it's also kind of operating from there. So a lot of these companies were started by people who worked for Tesla or other electric vehicle startups. So it's kind of not just like a lot of the expertise is staying in California, and also you can see a lot of these companies are funded by China, and then some of them are funded by Saudi Arabia. So a lot of the returns to these investments are also going outside of the United States. So you can really see how not only in OEMs but in startups, Michigan is falling behind. Now I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Just to quickly wrap this up, we also focus a little bit on charging infrastructure, and basically the results are kind of the same overall. In Michigan, we don't see as much investment. Consumers Energy is just about to start a 3-year program of a $10 million investment in charging infrastructure, as well as DTE is planning to invest $13 million in a similar program. But if we compare this to other states, California, New Jersey, and New York alone are planning to invest about a combined total of $1.3 billion in charging infrastructure. And as of right now, about 30% of charging stations in the U.S. are located in California, which really isn't shocking with all of the data that Jack just shared and we've seen. It's really focused in California. So it's clear that they're ahead and they're investing so much. And so really this data is just showing the overall divide and the fact that Michigan really needs to catch up in overall investment in the overall electric vehicle space.
Thank you.
My big question about why Michigan is behind, and I bet you have some answers in mind, is why? I mean, what's holding us back, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think definitely a big reason is the OEM's reluctance to invest in electric vehicles. I know FCA has long been very hesitant to invest in this space, especially in the U.S., because they just say they're just not as profitable, which is definitely true if all of your your organization and your your equipment is and everything is designed around the traditional fuel combustion vehicle and not electric vehicles. So I think that the transition from that to electric vehicles is going to be very costly, and it might not. They're probably these big OEMs are definitely in the past have been worried that it's not going to be profitable because they're going to be charged at a higher price point, and consumers might not want them, and there might be a space for them. But I think that was kind of proven wrong with Tesla, who's done a lot, right in that space.
Headline this morning?
No.
Temporarily pulled the X3, the $35,000 model from the market.
Mm-hmm.
Just can't produce it for that. You can't buy it online, and you can't buy it at the dealership.
Mm.
They're talking about bringing it back at about $39,500 because they figured out that they need to boost the battery. They need to have a little bit more range. But for now, you can't get one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know Tesla I mean, I don't know if anyone can speak to Tesla more, has had problems in the past and are currently, having a lot of problems. So I think that's partially why, like, Michigan OEMs have also been reluctant, because it doesn't seem quite as profitable yet, but that is where the industry is slowly shifting.
I think that's true, but it's also likely to be unprofitable elsewhere. I mean, the profit is the technology and the infrastructure and everything else has to come along, and our OEMs seem to see it as even less profitable than that. It's kind of a sunk cost fallacy. It's like, if we're already doing things this way, then the sense of what it would cost us to shift to something else is higher than if you were starting from ground zero. The other thing that occurs to me is there just isn't the political will to do it here yet, and that the legislature has, for example, prevented dealerships by state law, whereas in California, many municipalities simply will not let you build any infrastructure without electric. So,
Yeah.
I have a question. So I think I had the story right with Rivian, that I think they actually started in Florida and quickly came to find out that they were just way too distant from like the automotive supply chain. And so then they decided to pick up and move to Michigan, which, it's a huge win for Michigan. It makes me just think like, okay, the supply chain infrastructure is here. And I'm curious, in your research, is there an equivalent supply chain out in California? How can Michigan lean into that and maybe attract some of those startups that might be in other parts of the country?
Sorry. Yeah, so Rivian is based in Michigan, but if I recall correctly, I think they're manufacturing in Indiana. And so and in terms of California, a lot of their manufacturing plants are in Nevada, Arizona, so it seems like the California companies are trying to keep like their supply chain close to them, obviously. But one thing that I think electric vehicle companies, if they want to produce in the Midwest in general, is to repurpose a lot of these factories. So, for example, there's a lot of SUVs and pickup trucks. So I know one of those companies was repurposing an old Hummer factory to produce some of their SUVs. So I think making use of these existing infrastructure in here would be a good idea.